Hey guys, Lucas Smith here, again with my buddy Frank Lopez, and today we're going to talk about short-term vacation rentals. Yay or nay? Keep them or lose them?
Okay, so I'm going to say lose it.
Okay?
Thumbs down.
Okay? I'm going to give you the opportunity to be wrong first. You know, I have a buddy, he says we could do it your way, but then we both be doing it wrong.
Okay. Sounds like something I would say.
So why are you against it? Why do you think we shouldn't have short-term vacation rentals here in California, Frank?
Okay, so aside from the obvious, and the obvious meaning, the personal aspect of it, my best argument is the unpredictable cash flow. So you've got a rental, it's vacant. You've got to do something with it. You're not living in it. So either you're going to rent it out to somebody who wants long-term rental, or long-term meaning, a lease of a year or longer. I did a little bit of research on this, and the vacancy rate on long-term rentals is typically 5%.
Okay.
The vacancy rate, typical vacancy rate on short-term rentals, meaning overnight, meaning a week or less, is 40%. So that's a lot. And I knew that there would be a difference. I just didn't know it was going to be that significant.
So what you're saying is, as a property owner, you don't think that it's wise to hold your property up as a short-term rental. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that it's a tough way of doing business. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my brother owns a classic car, and he doesn't drive it a lot, so he has it online, and you can rent it.
Uh-huh.
So and so you've got a choice of, so there's that additional income, right? That's coming in because it's just sitting there. Um, but by the same token, you're doing two things. One is um, you're you're putting a lot of miles on the car that you don't have to. So there's the wear and tear of the car by just by renting it out. Um, and maybe that's not a good example, but let's say you bought a car with the intention of, hey, I can justify to my wife that I paid this much for this car because guess what? We're going to make money
Because
on it.
I'm making money on it. Okay, okay, I
Exactly.
get it, I get it. But hold
Exactly.
on. Let me. So I'm gonna interject here for a minute, right? And I'm gonna be Captain Obvious right from the get, right? I mean, look, Frank, here in Southern California, just Southern California, we get over 50 million visitors to come visit our amusement parks, to visit our coastline, right? And I mean, in places like Coachella and here in Orange County, right? This becomes about $1.1 billion in economic windfall that comes into those communities from those people coming in out of state, right? Not to mention, it also creates additional transient occupancy tax, TOT. So on a short-term rental, you always pay the transient occupancy tax, which is the same thing you pay in hotel rooms, you pay it everywhere, right? And that creates additional tax revenue for the cities and counties that you and I don't have to pay out of our pocket. So, just from a sheer economic standpoint, we're talking about billions of dollars in revenue for retailers, for the homeowners, for Uber drivers, right? Because you often fly in, you'll take a taxi, take an Uber, right? All of those things that rely on the tourism industry here in California. So I think it creates a huge boon economically for the communities as well as the property owners. Well, I agree with you. It becomes a job. And I have that conversation with my owners all the time when they want to buy an Airbnb. I'm like, look, if you want this to work, this is a job. You got to work it like it's a job. You got to keep your rental clean. You got to, make sure your maintenance is done, and you got to actively market it in order to rent it to keep it occupied, right? Um, in fact, there's a math equation that you do, right? Is number of occupancy days required in order to cover your note. So anybody that I do a short-term rental for, when I sell them a short-term rental, we run this math equation and figure out how many days out of your year or out of your season, because they're always seasonal, do you have to have your property rented in order to cover your nut? So I think financially it just makes sense. And I think that in cities like Anaheim, where they're issuing no more short-term rental licenses, I think all of that is perpetrated by the hotel industry, who basically pays to get the politicians elected. I think it's cities and counties interfering with the right to do business for property owners.
Well, and you're right. That's another issue. Is that You're dealing with regulatory issues that you don't deal with a long-term tenant. Um, some states require licenses, most don't, but for the most part, you have to abide by the rent laws that apply to that city or that county. But yeah, it's there's no comparison to the amount of regulation that you deal with on short-term rentals. So that's actually a con as well. Now, but going back to what I was, I brought up the wear and tear. I mean, that's, it's one way of making money, um, but your expenses, the amount of expenses that, the amount of money that you're going to have to put into this, not only from a damage standpoint, but also from a who's going to manage it for you, who's going to clean it for you. Are you going to be going there and cleaning it every time somebody moves out, or do you hire somebody? So you've got the expenses of cleaning service. You might even have the expenses of a management company because if you're not a professional short-term rental company, you, you may or may not have the software. You may or may not know how to make it as easy as possible. So you're also taking on additional management fees as well. So, it's a harder way to do business, more wear and tear on your property, on top of that, greater expenses. So yeah, are you making more money? Yes, but you're what at a cost.
Agreed, there's going to be some wear and tear on your property, but that's going to force you to do more maintenance, Frank, right? That's going to make you maintain your property at a higher standard than you might necessarily with a long term rental where you're just comfortable getting the check every month. Also, one of my biggest things, because I stay in short term rentals 3 or 4 times a year, I've got 3 trips on my calendar right here where we're going to stay in a short term rental this year. Um, and for me, when I go with people that I'm close to, friends and family, and we get to stay in a house where we get to live family style, we eat together, we wake up together, we go do our fun things together, right? I do a lot of them on the river, right? Um, it's just a way better experience than when we all stay in individual hotel rooms. And often the cost of hotel rooms, especially here in Orange County when you get to the coast, is astronomical. I mean, to take 12 or 15 people on a trip to hotel rooms, right? The cost is exorbitant. Whereas maybe if you can share a house, that cost becomes a lot more available, bringing more people in and having a better experience, I think.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I use short-term rentals as well. We went to a wedding a couple of years ago, out of state, and it was a huge house. And we got together with friends and family, and that was actually probably more fun than the actual wedding itself. So don't get me wrong. I'm not against it. But I wouldn't want it next door to me. I mean, who wants, and I mentioned the personal at the very beginning, who wants the party house right next door? Who wants to deal with, loud music at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday night? So there's that part of it that I think there's a lot of backlash because nobody wants that.
I go in large groups, right? We go on vacation, right? And when I tell the owner of the short term rental, unless, now I have relationships with these people and they know us, that I'm bringing 12 people, most people say, heck no, because they don't want 12 drunk people there. I don't tell them that me and all my friends are sober and none of us drink. And we're probably all going to go to bed really early because we're going to get up at 5 a.m. and go wakeboarding. Right. And I have a
Well,
hard time convincing them that that's really all we want to do. Do you know what I'm
well,
saying? So I
I,
get that
I'm
you don't
not
want
I'm
it
not
next door.
I'm not buying it right now either, Lucas.
True story, though. Me and all my friends, we go rent these houses together. Pretty much everybody's sober. The kids might bring a couple things to drink, but that's on them, right? They don't get up early if they do. But I just think it's really about owners' rights, right? Where's our property rights? And I would beg to differ. I know for a fact that in most of these cities where it's most common, licensing requirements, because I sell in a lot of vacation areas. I sold 3 in Big Bear last year. I sell a lot in Anaheim. Licensing is required. And there's regulation that's already in place by the city, right? So for them to block licensing, if you are meeting all of the requirements and you're willing to be a responsible owner, I think that's ridiculous. I think that infringes upon our rights as property owners to make the highest and best use of our investment.
No, I get it, and you're right. The income on a short-term rental is typically, twice what you would get on a long term. Even after you factor in the vacancies,
Right.
it's still a more profitable way of doing things. Um, as long as you're willing to put up, like I said, with the additional wear and tear, the unpredictability of the cash flow, because you mentioned Coachella. Well, how predictable is? I mean, that is predictable.
Sure, there's a
But
season. Or where I
yeah,
go in Arizona, there's a season,
right,
right? You can predictably say your season is May through September.
right. So during Coachella, you're going to be busy, but what about the rest of the year? You've got the unpredictability of that as well. Um, so, uh, and like I said, I think the biggest issue for me is, at the end of the day, yes, I have clients that also own short-term rentals, but and I use them. But would you want them next door to you? Would you want them across the street from you? That sort of thing. It just,
Well, no, I
um,
don't want them next door, but I don't want them to limit my right to do them, Frank. So, quick
right,
wrap up on your argument because we're out of time here. So, your biggest argument is not in my backyard.
not in my backyard. Exactly.
Okay. And my biggest argument, right, is I am capitalist, right? I've said this plenty of times, right? I am a free market capitalist, and I think that we as property owners should not be limited in the ways that we're able to make money with our property, as long as, right, we are respecting others' right to quiet use of and enjoyment of their property.
Until they're across the street from your home.
Well, and if the people were doing it across the street from my home and it was interfering with my right to quiet enjoyment, I would definitely be against it, right? I would say that person, that owner was then disrespecting my right to quietly enjoy my property.
There you have it.
All right. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it. So if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you, Frank?
FrankLopezBroker.com.
FrankLopezBroker.com. That's pretty easy. And me, I'm easy. You just type in sell my home, Lucas at sellmyhomerealestate.com or sellmyhomerealestate.com. Either way, you can find us. Thanks for watching. Frank, I appreciate it. Always great to see you, my friend.
Talk to you soon.
Bye bye.